I'm Veronica Chambers. I'm a writer and editor. This is my anthology, Queen Bee, a celebration of the power and creativity of Beyoncé Knowles-Carter. I keep doing that. I'm like, true beehive would not get the Carter in front of the Knowles, but you know, these things happen in America. And this is actually my second anthology. The first anthology that I wrote was called The Meaning of Michelle, and it was about Michelle Obama, and it came out right after the Obamas left the White House. And after we did that, I kind of was done, because I was like over something about Michelle Obama, and now I've got nothing to say about nobody. And I was out with my editor, and she was like, she kept going, you have to do another anthology, you have to do another anthology. And I was like, well, who could we write about that would be at all as interesting as writing about Michelle Obama? And one day, and literally we had these lunches. So I have lunch with Elizabeth Disregard, my editor, probably every 3 months. And so we have this lunch, and usually we have lunch, like 3 lunches where nothing happens, but we just talk about all the people that we like Michelle Obama. And then finally at like the 3rd lunch, she said, what about Beyonce? And I literally, at first I said no, because anthologies are so much work. And then I left, but the minute I left the building, I was like, I know I'm going to do this anthology, because there's so much to say about Beyonce. And it's interesting because her image is so tightly controlled that there's like a couple of celebrity biographies about her. Oddly enough, there's a couple of coloring books on her that they've been managed to get through. You can't easily reprint pictures of her or interviews or whatever. So Elizabeth's thought was that, like, for this very dedicated fan base, there wasn't the like thoughtful, like intellectual piece on her. And the more I researched that, the more I felt like it was true. So we ended up pulling together this piece and this book, which came out a week ago, and it has a lot of my favorite writers: Lovey Ajayi, Lena Waithe, Brittany Cooper, Kid Fury, Melissa Harris Perry, Michael Eric Dyson, who went on the Breakfast Club in New York and did this whole thing about how Beyonce has demolished Michael Jackson's legacy because she's triumphed above him both personally and professionally, which caused a whole controversy. Because no matter how much controversy there is around Michael Jackson, there are people who are willing to like go to the mat for Michael Jackson. So Michael Eric Dyson did that piece. And Fatima Robinson, who's choreographed for Beyonce, she talked about how rare it is to have someone be at the level of dancer and singer as Beyonce, which is something that I literally had never thought about. And she said that, like, partly, like, when those things happen at the same level, it is, and it's not just someone learning choreography, like, it's someone, like, basically, I'm doing a project at the New York, so I'm working at the New York Times for the next year, and I'm doing a project with Misty Copeland, and one of the things that Fatima Robinson said is that basically Beyonce could never open her mouth, and she could be a dancer at the level of Misty Copeland, which was so surprising. She was like, she could just dance. She has that level of movement, of extension, of understanding of choreography. And she was saying how rare that is for people who can actually sing. And so she talks about that in that essay. And I thought I would ask, I have questions for both Clancy and Lisa, but I thought we would start, I wanted to ask Clancy to read from Lovey's essay, and for Lisa to read from Robin Boylan, who wrote about Beyonce's Southern roots. So I thought we'd start there.
Cool. It's Ajayi. Ajayi?
Yes.
Ajayi. Okay, so this is, Beychella is proof that Beyonce is the greatest performer alive, period. I'm not arguing. By Lovey Ajayi. Beyonce Giselle of House of Knowles, first of her name, snatcher of edges, killer of stages, citizen of Creole wonderland, legendary black girl, queen, I gotta up my intake of biotin and reorder my supply of Jamaican black castor oil. Beyoncé stays coming for all my new growth. I'm not even mad because I gladly sacrificed some coiffure for the queen. I didn't go to Coachella, but I was a citizen of Beychella, watching her performance and realizing more and more that we were watching a legend. That is not an overstatement. If Beyoncé decides she's sick of us lessers and never releases another piece of music, she has already earned icon status, and I'm not here to argue with you. People have been crowned icons for doing and being less. But this woman, who has made history over and over again, and did it again by being the first black woman to headline Coachella, took the chance to cement her place as the greatest entertainer alive. Let me repeat, Beyoncé is the greatest performer alive. And if you disagree, there's hateration where your heart used to be. This should be undisputed. Tell me who else has the showmanship, the excellence, the choreography, the voice. If you can't, stay out of the fray. People have been saying Janet Jackson. Listen here, I love me some Damita Jo, just like the next, but this ain't the era of Rhythm Nation. She is forever great, but she is not at her prime, which is okay because she's also 20 years older than Bey. I said what I said, stay nauseous. The reason why I'm especially staking this claim is that Beyoncé does it while making a point to be as black as possible. There is something really special about watching Bey in all her noir pixie dust, reminding folks over and over again that blackness is something to be proud of. She sang the Black National Anthem while a 100% all-black band was behind her, giving all the life. They did a full step show while wearing branded sweatshirts in the tradition of historically black Greek letter fraternities and sororities. They even stepped as she told people to suck on her balls. Then she changed into a costume with a crest on her chest. The crest had the Eye of Horus on it and 4 segments: Queen Nefertiti, a Black Panther, a fist up, and a bee for the Bayhive. She played Malcolm X's Black Woman speech. She paid tribute to Fela Kuti. For 2 hours, she performed for a mostly white Coachella audience, with very few white faces on that stage. But really, she performed for the millions of black people she knew were tuned in online everywhere. It was a brilliant display of excellence. It was a performance of bravado. It was a musical that I'd watch on Broadway over and over again. I think back to when Lemonade dropped and how it was an ode to diasporic blackness. The fact that she is so committed to paying some serious homage to her blackness and her Africanness and the diaspora just makes my spirit hit the shoki and ozonto. Plus, she does it on such grand stages, so she makes sure the world consumes her pride. Lemonade had Bey rocking some braids with baby hair to prepare for all that Nubian. She had women in all types of hairdos sprinkled through the film. There are righteous afros, luscious weaves and braids, standing around looking like an army of ancestral blessings. But what stood out so prominently in that black-ass video was Bey's homage to Afro-spiritualism. From her Sorry song up, she featured elements of Ifa religion, Hey Oshun in that yellow dress, with dancers, the face painting, and even a water ritual. In the words of Yoruba people, Awanomo Igbe showed up. Her connection to that divine was as black as she could get. She talked about generational curses and breaking them. She gave glory to the Orishas throughout this video. So African, I almost wanted her to serve up jollof rice.
You. Yes.
Okay, so this is part of the essay by Robin Boylorn.
Yes. Who's a professor at University of Alabama.
Her carefully crafted public persona was never without a reference to her Houston beginnings. Hardly home, but always repping. Beyoncé, like me, always stayed close to home, metaphorically, if not literally. Conspicuous sonic signifiers of the South seeped out in the Southern drawl of her speaking voice, the Houstonian accent in her spoken words on her tracks, her collaboration with down South hip-hop heads like Andre 3000, Bun B, and Slim Thug, and the visual and iconic imagery of Southscapes she offered in music videos. Shout-outs and subtle Southern innuendos had always been present in her work, but in her fifth and eponymous album, she seemingly went from repping where she was from to representing where she was from. Aisha Durham, a Black feminist cultural critic, characterizes Beyoncé as the Southern belle of hip-hop culture, whose Southernness is epitomized in her public performances of Southern femininity and self-perception. While Beyoncé's cultural currency has always transcended the South, in 2013, after the internet release of Bow Down, I Been On, she doubled down in her Southern sound with an embrace of dirty South trap music as a way of acknowledging and owning her full country self, complications, contradictions, and all. In that song, later released as the first part of Flawless on her self-titled album, Beyoncé reintroduced herself as someone who was not only from the South, but who identified with the South and its affiliated and working class aesthetics. The South, whether urban or rural, is often associated with poverty-stricken communities, rurality, retrograde thinking, and conservative religiosity. There are also assumptions that most Southerners are white. Beyoncé resists problematic presumptions by presenting the South as a main character in her work, instead of letting it be blurred in the background. Through the imagery of Black bodies in various hues and contexts, her visual compilations mix opulence and deficiency like sugar syrup and sweet tea. Instead of compartmentalizing characterizations of Blackness in the South, she mashes them together, young and old, city and country, holy and secular, cis and trans, light-skinned and dark, heterosexual and queer, public and private, but all Black, inviting her global audience to a new way of seeing and understanding American Southern culture. Cultural understandings of the dirty South are both regional and class-based. So while Beyoncé grew up in a traditional cis-het home in a middle-class neighborhood, she is still able to access and signify ratchetness, behavior linked to the ghettoization of Black womanhood, and respectability, simultaneously and without the threat or impression of co-optation or appropriation. She embodies ratchet respectability, a hybrid of ratchetness and respectability politics that attempts to disprove some stereotypes about Black women while embracing others. With a backdrop of the Black South, Beyoncé teased her sixth studio album, Lemonade, with the unexpected release of Formation, a song and video that embraced stereotypic conceptions of the South by centering them. The song and video feature the Louisiana-laced voices of Messi, Maya, and Big Frida. Their words and recognizable accents are inflected with inadvertent authenticity and lend credence to the song's intention to become a Southern anthem. The refrain, which reminds us where her parents are from and where she was raised, offers additional evidence that Beyoncé's goal is to center and celebrate Southern Black culture and her Southern Black lineage. By identifying herself as a Texas Bama, she charts a trifecta trajectory of the South: Texas, Alabama, and Louisiana. She also manages to situate preferences for soul food, baby hair, Negro noses, and hot sauce, not only as Black, but Southern Black. Donning luxuriously long micro braids while leaning out the window of an El Camino, Beyoncé is juxtaposed against Black women with colored weaves in a beauty supply store, scenes from a Black church and Black spirituality, representations of Southern goth, an all-Black marching band, a Black man wearing a cowboy hat on a horse, and Black women dressed in white holding hand fans as we shift from weather-worn homes drowned by floodwaters to a group of Black women twerking in the parlor of an ancient mansion. Each tableau is steeped in Southern jargon and repeated in the visual accompaniment to Lemonade, which features Beyoncé alongside an assemblage of Black women in the country. The visuals and voiceovers, earned all this money, but they'll never take the country out me, echo that no matter how successful she is, she will always be a country girl. With the inclusion of a traditional country song on Lemonade, Beyoncé insisted that the ownership of country music is not limited to white people in Nashville or Black men in the Dirty South. Daddy Lessons, a track about the advice a wayward father gives his daughter about men like him, includes all the trappings of a country song, including straightforward storytelling and references to evangelical Christianity, guns, and relationships. Despite the success of the song, including an invitation for Beyoncé to perform at the Country Music Awards in 2016, it was rejected by the Recording Academy's Country Music Committee and was therefore ineligible for a Grammy Award nomination in the country music categories, a seeming rejection of her efforts at portraying herself on her brand as country. Her foray into the country music realm was met with skepticism from some who claimed it wasn't country enough, and support from others who say it was classic country. Despite the disputes, the song, which was later covered by the country group Dixie Chicks, proves Beyoncé's artistry crosses boundaries and genres, and that the Southern roots and references of Bey's music catalog are expansive enough to include hand claps and two-steps. Lemonade was a serenade to Black women and an ode to the South. By privileging and finding the beauty in spaces and bodies often disappeared or made ugly in mainstream media, Beyoncé created a visually stunning portrait of the South with a gaze that focused on how we see ourselves rather than how we are perceived by others. This Southern subjectivity offered visibility and recognition by telling Black women's stories that centered rather than excluded them. As a project, Lemonade was unapologetically Black women-centered and focused, a personalized open letter to our resilience, and an invitation for self-love and acceptance. It channeled the rural roots of Blackness and resonance of Black women's intergenerational diasporic experiences. Beyoncé poured metaphysical lemonade in a see-through pitcher, like a see-through picture, and made me feel vulnerable but visible, a visibility that reverberated in the Black community, but especially for those of us located in the South, those of us who grew up in the South, those of us who recognized our mothers, grandmothers, and sisters in the storyline.
I guess I would start by asking you, Lisa, do you think that that idea that the South is still portrayed as predominantly white is a common one, or is that something you've experienced in your work and your experience?
No, I actually thought that was an interesting comment because it doesn't speak to my view at all, but my view is constrained by my experience. So
Right.
I wonder who that author was referencing, if she felt there was some kind of mass media bias towards white, the South is white, but no,
Right.
not at all.
I mean, I wonder if it's also maybe a reference to kind of the idea of blue states and red states.
Yeah.
And
Or Gone with the Wind or something.
Yeah.
I never think of the South as all white.
yeah,
Quite the opposite.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. But I wonder if it's also, I mean, I think it was interesting the way she unpacked the idea of like who owns country music, you know, because that to me speaks to some of the things that she's pointing to, like the fact that they wouldn't let
Yeah,
the
that was
song-
curious to me that they found some reason to have it be ineligible. So what
Yeah.
makes a country song eligible?
Yeah.
When I go down to Georgia to visit the area where my dad was from, I often listen to country stations just because I never get to. And I can't imagine that any of Beyonce's work wouldn't at least qualify,
Right.
if not supersede a lot of the songs that I would hear
Right.
on the radio.
Right.
Mm.
Jerry's laughing because we have conversations about country music.
Really?
You know, I think one of the things that in doing this book, there was a question about heritage and about how much Beyonce has embraced her Blackness. I mean, I think with the Beychella, you know, there's a famous interview that you guys probably have heard of that Miss Tina, as Beyonce's mother is referred to, and I still refer to her as Miss Tina. I'm like, never met her, but I'll be calling her Miss Tina all my days. And she apparently, when they were previewing the Beychella set, she was like, you're going out to the desert with all these white people and they're not going to get it. And Beyonce was like, well, it's not really for them. And so I think that idea that she came to the point in her career, like, there, I don't know, I feel like when I was growing up, there was such a thing about what artists were crossover artists. You know, like Michael Jackson was crossover and Whitney Houston was crossover. And the fact that she could be such a powerful artist and she could go to somewhere like Coachella and do a historically black college inspired set, and her mother's worried for her still, and it's, you know, and it sets the world on fire. I mean, can you talk about, like, in your work, how much you felt like you have to embrace culture, or that embracing culture is something that you're able to, like, earn in a certain space?
Is that for both of us?
Yeah, for both of you.
Well, I think, honestly, I kind of think of Beyonce as creating culture, but in terms of, like, my work embracing, I mean, in terms of food, there's the culture of food, so you're kind of trying to build within that culture. So I think that's important. But just to go back to the point you were making about Miss Tina's concern for Beyonce going to Coachella and Beyonce saying it's not for them, it's for everyone else. I think that also speaks to her brilliance in terms of understanding where people are and understanding social media and understanding her fans, and knowing that, you know, as soon as that performance dropped, people were on Twitter, people were on, you know, like, people were watching it because it was, you could stream it. And so she understood where people are and that she can reach them wherever, which I think is part of why she is an icon, because people know that they can't ever expect to not be surprised by her. And she's always ready to surprise people, and she knows how to reach people and use technology. And for me, that was what was amazing about Beychella. That, like, I didn't attend. This was happening, like, all the way in California, and here I am watching it, like, and just like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna try to do that choreography. Like, there's so many moments. She created so many moments, and you didn't have to be there to share them. And that, that's not answering your question.
No, but it was fascinating. So,
so I'm not in the Bay Hive. Although I did, while driving around Georgia, buy Lemonade and just listen to it repeatedly.
Okay.
Which
and when was that?
Great. Not that long ago, just a year.
Is it good music for driving around Georgia?
Yeah. I think it's good music for driving around anywhere.
Okay, good. Yeah.
But what I know of her and what I know of her videos, I'm so I'm just awed by the creativity and the freshness that's in them, and I feel like she, and I guess Beychella is a really good example of it, has a sense of her reach, has a sense of the power of the medium or the media, and doesn't, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, when she talks about having hot sauce in her purse, it's not for everybody that she's saying that. But she just says it, and she sort of wields that cultural iconography without concern, it seems, which is just really great.
And bringing it back to food.
I was about to say.
Of, like, for me, my first encounter with Lemonade was watching it on HBO, like when it was released and you could see just the visual album, so to speak, and seeing that Leah Chase, who's the proprietor and chef of Dookie's Chase in New Orleans, this woman is 96 years old. She's an icon in her own right. When I saw Leah Chase in that, video montage, I was just like, whoa, my jaw dropped. First of all, I've been able to interview her, so I was psyched that somebody who I've had voice contact with was in a Beyonce video, but I was also like, props to Beyonce to understand, here she is at this plantation in Louisiana. She's really paying homage. She's bringing in layers of culture in so many different ways, and that including a person like Leah Chase. And so I think she's really smart in studying culture, and I think she works with people who are really smart in understanding culture and how to include that visually, musically, through choreography, everything.
Yeah.
Right, because if you were going to do a focus group of that video and say who would be great to bring into this video to maximize your sales and reach your widest audience, Leah Chase would not be the first person anybody would say, but she's an amazing figure in history.
Yeah.
I think that there's an interesting line for me between Michelle Obama and Beyonce in that way, because when we did the Michelle Obama book, Alicia Hall Moran, she talked about having been at the White House a few times and like gotten to know them, at least on some level. She said she felt like there was something going on with Michelle Obama with all the cameras and the visuals was, if you're going to take a picture with me, I'm going to make sure to bring this 100-year-old person in. And I'm going to, like, if it's going to be all this about me, then I'm going to try to bring more people into the picture. And I feel like there's something similar happening with Beyonce, that she's always trying to bring someone in. Like, I think the Brit Awards is a great example. Like, you know, she won a Brit Award and she wasn't able to attend, and she sent the classic, like, video acceptance for the award. And behind her, she had a portrait of Meghan Markle wearing a crown. And it's like, I'm going to send this to London, and by the way, you should be paying a lot more attention and respect to Meghan Markle. And so I feel like there's something going on with her, even though she's so much younger than Michelle, that she's really not just trying to like be the girl in all the pictures. Like, she's trying to like broaden the frame. And I feel like Leah Chase is a great example of that.
Yeah, she's doing it a lot. And it's interesting to see that evolution, you know, like from Destiny's Child to now, to see how she, in many ways, has, like, I feel like we're on her journey too, of her embracing the culture, you know what I mean? Because it wasn't like that with, and which is fine, because that's how people evolve, but
I think the artistic evolution is really interesting. So for me, I was talking to someone about doing an anthology, and I love the idea of collecting groups of writers, but there's also this kind of like pressure moment, because I know I can make myself deliver, but to make 20 other people deliver on deadline is so stressful. So do you want to talk about your anthology and what that experience has been like for you?
Yeah.
And let's flash the cover again.
Okay, so this, I just have to say, this is the cover of the book, but I glued it onto another book because it's not out yet, but I wanted to hold this in my hands because I worked so hard on it. So it's called Apple Tree, Writers on Their Parents, and basically I was walking down the street in West Philadelphia, where I was born and raised, and I had a cup of coffee from Starbucks, and I like threw it away. I had walked out of the store, half of it left, and I was outside in the sun for a minute, and I threw it away, and I thought, what was that about? What, like, there was some kind of strong, like, body memory thing going on. This is a long way to answer your question, but there was something going on where I felt like I had done something wrong, and I couldn't figure out what it was, and so I just thought about it for a little while, and I realized that I was following the rules of a black man in the 1930s Jim Crow South. I was behaving in that way. I am none of those things, but my father was. And my father taught me that you should never drink on the street. You should never drink in public. And when he grew up, it mattered. And it was not an exaggeration to say that choices like that could be life and death in his town. And it started me thinking about what else was in there that really didn't, maybe wasn't useful in my life or necessary in my life. I had all sorts of privileges including growing up in West Philadelphia, when I did all the stuff. And yet this was still part of me and how I looked at the world. And I thought, how do other people look at the world through the lens of their parents? And isn't it amazing that we can still sort of interact with them, even though my father had been dead for years at that point. But my relationship with him was still evolving as I enacted some of his behavior, even though he wasn't there. And it was fascinating to me. And I thought, what do other people have to say about this? So I asked 25 people to write about the moment they realized they had turned into their parents. And that's what everyone does when I tell them. They're like, oh boy, let me tell you about that one.
Yes.
So it's like kind of obs, right? Like, of course we're like our parents in some ways, but I think there's something about when you've been through enough of life's stuff, that you can look at it with a kind of curiosity and compassion both towards yourself and your parent, even if it's like a kind of a crappy behavior or something that you would rather not reenact or doesn't seem useful. So I asked these people to write, and I had never done an anthology before. I had sort of watched from a distance as you did the Meaning of Michelle anthology, and you basically having to chase people down, like, will they ever turn this in?
Chase, beg, cajole, threaten.
Yeah. So I was doing this anthology, and a really lovely university press picked it up, read, no money, hardly any money. And I was asking people, and I wanted a range of voices, because I thought, like, I could have talked for hours to you about how, like, the thinking behind an anthology. What makes an anthology interesting? What would make it possible for people to want to actually read everything in the anthology and not just the one person they knew?
Yeah.
And so I thought it has to be people saying different things. It can't just be an amen chorus. So I did this experiment in diversity where I just tried to figure out how many different voices and approaches and possible thoughts. And it was, for a while, it was a little Noah's Ark like. I was like, well, I'm going to have 2 of these kinds of people, and then I'm just going to see what they write. Like, they don't have to write whatever it is that fits their demographic slice. They don't have to talk about being adopted in their piece, but I want to make sure that there's someone who's adopted in there to talk about their parents, right? Because what might they have to say?
Yeah.
So all well and good, and I got people, some people I don't even know, to agree to write for, like, McDonald's money.
Yeah.
Right? I split up
all anthologies are McDonald's money.
Yeah. And people agreed to do it, in part because of the reaction that y'all had of like, So that was great. And it was really interesting who delivered right on the day or the day before. And there were 2 pieces that I thought were never going to come in. They were way past the deadline. One of them was from one of my closest friends. And it really strained our friendship because I was just like, I don't know how to say hi to him on FaceTime without saying, where the is my piece? But I just kept trying, and I just kept trying to say, would it be helpful if we talk about it? What could we do? I really love this piece. Yeah. And then the other one was this person I didn't know, and I was kind of invested because he has some cachet in the literary world, and just wasn't coming. He'd just say, oh yeah, I was just thinking about that. Yeah, I'm on my way to Vienna, but I'm thinking about that. I'm just back from London, but I'm thinking about that.
The marinating that writers do, you're just like, what?
Yeah, stop marinating.
Yeah, exactly.
Pour it out.
So my friend wrote a piece that is one of my favorite things that he's ever written, and it turns out it was hard for him because he wrote about his mother, and he's never written about his mother before. He's always written about his father when he's written personal things. And it was really complicated, and he struggled with it tremendously, but it's really great.
That's great.
And the other one just came in, and he's like, I understand if you don't want to use it, that's fine. And it was a gorgeous piece also.
Wow.
So who knew? But then the editing experience was joyful with everyone.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like once it's in, you can sort of like get there. It's funny because I had one piece that was very late, and I don't think she would be mad that I told you, but Yolanda Galt, who had been in our Michelle Obama book, we came back to this, and literally I just thought every other week after it was past due, I just thought, I'm gonna send her an email and tell her I'm done. And I'm gonna go to somebody else because somebody else wants to do this. And I just kept thinking, wait. And she wrote a piece about Beyoncé and the elevator incident. And she wrote about her sister and about what it was like when her own marriage was deteriorating and everybody thought it was perfect, and how her sister was like the first to know, and how, like, what is it like to be in a relationship that everybody's like making it seem like you're like Black Barbie and Ken, and your sister's like, is something wrong? Is something wrong? Is something wrong? And how the elevator incident sort of opened Beyoncé for her, and that it like gave her space to be a fan in a way that she just wasn't before. And I thought it was such a beautiful piece, and I was like, I'm so glad I didn't curse you out. 'Cause, like, I wasn't just gonna like fire her from the book. I was gonna curse her out from being late and making me late. Like, I had plans on that, and I literally just remember being like, well, good thing my butt was lazy with the cuss out, because I was late. Because I kind of had it on a to-do list, like, fire Yolanda, cuss her out, and then I was like, okay, maybe tomorrow. And then finally it came in, and people have literally said that piece made them cry. Like, they're just like, you know, like, what is it like, you know, to feel like you're in the midst of a relationship that just isn't what it looks like on the outside, and Yolanda is divorced. And I think it was a hard piece for her to write. I think she must have had so many things to think about. Her ex-spouse and her sister and her children, and, you know, I think she was weighing all of that. And I think that's the heart. It's so funny. I think with social media, we think everybody wants to say everything about themselves, but I actually find that writers are kind of careful. They are, I mean, most of the writers that I think you really love to read aren't like just spilling tea all over the place about their lives, because the same thing that makes them a great writer makes them careful with their words. And
Yeah. And
I don't know if you felt that in your work.
yeah, but also that even though I couldn't offer very much money, I could offer them this careful attention to their work and a chance to stretch themselves. And I think that's what my close friend did.
Yeah.
And that was worth a lot more than the McDonald's money.
Yeah.
So maybe
I think
the same thing.
absolutely.
I'm curious if the writers, if you had expectations about what they were going to say, and how you approach them, and because that's always my behind the scenes question, like, how do you decide to approach this or that person, and do you have a preconceived notion of what they might produce?
That's a good question. I think an anthology to me is like a dinner party. And so I'm always thinking, there's a couple of people that you're like, they've got to be there because they're, like, I think Melissa Harris Perry is just somebody who's always been like queen of the beehive. And she didn't want to do it because she was too busy. And I was like, but you're an acknowledged queen of the beehive. If you are not in this book, it will not seem legit. And so what do we do if you don't do this for me? And what was interesting was that one of her former students, Moncomper Conte, who's a Senegalese American, she's a graduate student at CUNY. She's a graduate student in journalism. She was going to write a piece, and she basically wrote about how she grew up with all these student loans, and all Beyoncé was talking about was, you know, like, I spend that money skirt, you know, I bought him a jet, I buy it a Lamborghini, and she was just like, I'm not here for it. Everything in my life is a financial struggle, and I don't want to hear about your diamonds or your car or your man or your private jet. And I actually sent the draft of Moncomper's essay to Melissa, and Melissa was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, she's daring to criticize Beyoncé for commercialism. I want to respond to that. And then they got into a whole thing about skin color, because so they started writing together. And the other thing Moncomper was saying is that she felt like Destiny's Child was colorist. It was a colorist group. And that she felt like this thing of Beyoncé being this lead singer and Moncomper being dark-skinned, that she felt like Melissa had an identification with Beyoncé that was unexplored. And so they got into it, and I was like, I love it. I love this like drama between the two of you, and I think you should go there. And I think Melissa was unsure because she's such a thoughtful writer. Like, I think she was unsure that the conversation was something she wanted to publish. And so that became like me kind of like having this back and forth with the two of them, that I do think those kind of conversations are worth publishing in an anthology. Maybe that's not Melissa's next book, but I think in an anthology there's room for that kind of like back and forth. So
Yeah, I noticed in the introduction that you just like, let me just get the discussion of colorism right up and out. Was it particularly because of that?
I think that I spent so much time researching, and I guess the question I felt at the end of the day was that there are some people who feel like Beyoncé is iconic and that she got opportunities that other Black women would not have gotten because of her color. And I think at the end of the day, when you line up all the evidence in my very like judge-like way, there is a way in which she has strategically like outmaneuvered her competition. I think the hard work, the hours of hard work. I mean, when you talk about Beychella, if you go back and look at Amir Thompson's tweet about that, he was just like, okay, you guys, I produce all the time. Let me tell you how many hours of rehearsal, laying down microphones, instrumentation. Like, he was like, that is like 8 months work that she produced. Like, she kind of just shows up and makes it look easy. And Fatima
she just had twins.
Yeah. And Fatima does the same thing. She says, like, as a choreographer, like, literally, she's like, dancers. I mean, it's funny. I was just interviewing Misty Copeland for this project we're doing about dance, and she was saying that one of the things I was reading about dance, and I don't know, anybody here trained dancers or took dance lessons early on? So I read books, which is not hard on the body, but apparently very early on, if you're going to dance to any degree, you have to like embrace like levels of pain, and you're contorting your bodies in ways that you're not supposed to, and that, or not supposed to, but that are not easily gotten into. And so the level of pain, I think that, to me, like, you could say, oh, she achieved so much because of her skin color, and then you think, she started at 11, she was in this group, she fired her father, she married this guy but didn't marry him for like 6 years and lived in her own place because she's like, I've got keys and I've got a place. And then she starts, like, to me the last 8 years are really interesting because I think the Beyoncé album, the Lemonade album, the Carter's album, when she completely steps away from the record companies and the radio stations, and she's like, you're not gonna trot me out like your trick pony, and I'm not gonna be here doing this like, let me tell you about my album and why you should like it and all this stuff. She's like, this is a body of work, and you can really see how she's building towards that. I think it's pretty powerful, and I think to dismiss that because of skin color felt like an uninteresting conversation to me. So I was like, I don't not acknowledge that there is colorism, but I just think at this level, like, there's so many ways in which it could have gone wrong. I'm really interested. We're a small group. If you disagree, let me know. But I think at this level, I just think it's disrespectful to how hard she's worked and how imaginative she's been and all the like hundreds of choices she's made, good choices in an industry full of bad choices, to like attribute so much success to skin color. So that's why I was like, I was kind of trying to channel Levy, because Levy's whole thing is like, I'm not gonna argue.
Yeah.
Like, don't at me, I'm not arguing. So I was kind of like, in terms of skin color, don't at me, I'm not arguing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I don't know. But I think it's a good question, because I could be wrong, but I just didn't want to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? But I think there's definitely some people who feel very strongly. And like Montcomper working through that with Melissa, like that was an interesting thing to see too. Like, she was Melissa Harris Perry's student, and now they're friends, and they're kind of on their way to being colleagues in academia. To see them like work through that personally, and for Melissa to be like, I actually have not really like thought about skin color privilege in this way. Is like a really interesting thing to me. But I thought let them do that because they're doing that as sort of trusted
Right.
friends, and I didn't want to do that in my little 2 cents on it. So Clancy,
Yeah.
do you want to talk about your work and talk about the world of food and heritage? I mean, you have such a classical training in food. I mean, do you feel, I guess one of the things that I think has been interesting about the arc of Beyoncé is that I think that increasingly you see her showing up more as herself, right?
Yeah.
And more like from the accent to the Houstonness to the whatever, she's like, I don't have to change to this to be more acceptable. Do you feel like you've been able to show up as fully yourself from the very beginning? And what do you think allowed you to do that?
I think I can show up as myself. I also really don't know any other way to show up. So I'm not trying to show up as anybody else. I think the fact that I'm classically trained may be an advantage in that I have worked in restaurants, I've worked in French restaurants, I know my way around a kitchen, I know my way around a professional kitchen. So I feel like I have a good vocabulary with food, and and in terms of showing up as myself, like the things that I'm interested in, I really only want to write about what I'm interested in and what kind of speaks to me. Hence, like my cookbook, Cooking for One, The Joy of Cooking for Yourself. Like, I'm single. My relationship with food has been with my family and with friends, but it's also been with me, like me feeding me. So that was something I wanted to write about. And then when I do recipe development, because I also develop recipes, I think about what I want to eat or what I would want to serve to people. And so in that way, I think I can be authentic. I think the food world is having a very interesting moment of kind of opening its doors to more people of color and queer people, and to have everybody kind of be themselves and put their identities first, which I think is really good. It's interesting for me to see what major publications are publishing, because sometimes I feel like in terms of food, they are looking for, I remember Bon Appetit did their first foray into having like a black person write an openly black piece on like the black family's Thanksgiving. And I didn't really relate to that story because I don't think black people are monolithic people, and I don't think we all have the same Thanksgivings, and some of us don't even celebrate Thanksgiving. But I found it interesting.
Some of us identify with Indians, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean in terms of some of us don't celebrate Thanksgiving. But it was interesting for me as a black person reading this food magazine that never really has black people in it, to see like, oh, this is where they're going with this. So in some ways, sometimes I feel like you have to be super, like, lead with your blackness, which is cool, but sometimes in terms of food, I think people should lead with whatever they want to, and primarily with the stories and foods that are interesting to them. But I also am interested in, like, so there's the classically trained part of me that's interested in French stuff and just wants to eat dessert. And then there's also the part of me that's interested in reading about my heritage and the people whose shoulders I stand on, like Aaliyah Chase or Georgia Gilmore, or you know what I mean? So there's stories that resonate with me that I want to write about or read about too.
So you referenced Georgia Gilmore, who you've written about for the New York Times, but the piece has not come out yet.
Yeah.
Do you want to
Who
talk
is
a little
that?
about
Yes.
her?
So Georgia Gilmore, holy smoke, an amazing woman who, all right, so when we think about the Montgomery bus boycott, most of us think Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., and we think about the boycott, and they're like our leading celebrities in that movement, or the leaders in that movement. But what often gets overlooked is all the people who helped make that boycott possible. So all the people who were driving cars, the car network that had to go on. Guess what? We all know cars need gasoline. They need to get their oil changed and all this. So that cost money. So there were weekly meetings in order to organize the boycott and keep it going. And they needed to have money. And so Georgia Gilmore organized people. She was cooking food, pound cakes, fried fish, like you name it, peas and rice. And she would sell it at these organizing meetings to help raise money to keep the bus boycott going. And moreover, she was organizing other people, namely domestic workers, because she herself worked as a housekeeper, or no, she actually worked in a kitchen, in like a restaurant kitchen. But she was organizing her neighbors and other people in jobs similar to hers so that they had the club from nowhere. And so every week they would sell food. They would sell food to white people. It was a way for white people who were on board with the bus boycott to participate. And mostly they were selling to their own communities and selling at these organizing meetings and raising, anywhere from $100 to $500 a week to keep these networks. Because remember, the boycott went on for over a year of people not using public transportation. They were raising all this money to feed it back into the movement, to pay for all of these things. And she's incredible because she organized that. She was the leader of the club and the creator of the Club from Nowhere. And what's also interesting is that beyond the bus boycott, decades later, she continued her activism to help desegregate a park where I think her son had been like arrested for either going through the park or something. Anyway, it was a park that was segregated beyond the end of segregation laws. And a case that she is one of the top people in went all the way to the Supreme Court. So I think she's a really interesting person because she was using food, she was using her kitchen, and she also eventually basically opened up a restaurant in her home that had people like Martin Luther King Jr. and Lyndon B. Johnson, and like all these leaders came through her kitchen, as well as postal workers and her neighbors and stuff. So she was a community organizer who fully organized within using food as the means of organizing and raising money, and then creating community through her kitchen that she opened into a restaurant. So she's a phenomenal, ordinary person doing extraordinary work, or who did extraordinary work, who I was so happy to write about.
Yeah, I'm excited for when that runs.
Me too.
So-
What's her last name?
Gilmore.
Georgia Gilmore.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're really excited about that. It was part of the Overlooked series that the New York Times has done in terms of going back and giving obits to people who didn't get them at the time. And it's something we've been working on, and Clancy wrote one of them,
Yeah.
which will run soon. So I don't know if you guys have any questions, but I thought I'd ask you two one more question, which is, it's Women's History Month, and even though it's so funny, I had to produce this Black History Month special for the New York Times. I have feelings about Black History Month. I don't know why, but Women's History Month I have less feelings about, and maybe because I'm always looking to women for examples, and I feel like being a woman is such a particular experience for me. Could you talk about one of the women that you wish people knew more about?
I'm going to say Georgia Gilmore. That's mine.
Wait, that was easy.
I know. It's going to take me 10 minutes to... Okay, go on. You go first.
Someone I wish people knew more about. I'm drawing a blank.
I know, it was a trick question.
Can I say something about Women's History Month instead?
Sure.
So, I know this sense of complicated feelings. In fact, one of the people who wrote an essay for me did his graduate school film thesis at Columbia, I think it was, on a campaign to end Black History Month, and he put a sandwich board on himself and stood in Times Square and tried to say that. Now, his parents were civil rights activists who were not down with his plan to end Black History Month, but he was trying to introduce a question to talk about why we're having this isolated experience, and I feel that way kind of about all the special things. But I was trying to think about Women's History Month, and I thought, I feel like we are in a time of women making history. Like, women's history is happening right now.
Right.
And it happened it was like the most exciting thing about the midterm elections.
Yeah.
And I'm excited, especially because there's so much darkness
Yes.
these days. I'm excited about that and witnessing that
Yeah.
and seeing what happens with that going forward.
Yeah.
That's my way of not answering your question.
No.
I have
Do
an
you-
answer.
Okay.
Well,
Can I
it's-
have your can
Well, my answer is.
Can you share an answer?
Yeah.
Well, so it is actually related to Georgia Gilmore because I think in terms of who I want people to know about more, I would like for us to talk to each other more and listen to each other's stories more because, so like, this is definitely like unfolding the possible overlooked event with
Right.
equity at the table. So we were thinking of a way of an event to have to kind of pay tribute to some of these women in the overlook section of the New York Times. And we were thinking of a theme because the whole overlook thing is like women who haven't been acknowledged. And so I feel like so often, and it's actually interesting to talk about this as we're talking about Beyoncé, love Beyoncé, but I feel like we are living in a moment where we pay so much attention to celebrities and some celebrities are amazing and we love to pay attention to them, but I think we should pay more attention to each other and we should acknowledge one another more. So in terms of who I want people to get to know, like literally your neighbor, you know what I mean? Like, because everybody I think has a very interesting story.
Yeah.
If you just listen and ask a few key questions.
Yeah.
So that's actually my answer. Get to know somebody who is literally right next to you or who you see every day but don't really have a conversation with, and especially if that person is a woman.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
bonus credit for women of color and queer people.
I think that's excellent. Does anyone in the audience have questions? Yes.
I have a recollection of Harry Belafonte calling out both Beyonce and Jay-Z. And frankly, I cannot remember what was involved in that incident. And so I can't remember what the response to it was. And so maybe this is a question that comes from somebody who's getting older and whose memory is fading. And I'll ask you all if you could refresh
Yeah,
me.
so I actually got into that because Carmen Perez, who was one of the leaders of the Women's March, she runs a nonprofit with Mr. Belafonte, and so she actually writes about that. So there was an incident. So Mr. Belafonte, as you know, has basically called out a whole generation of celebrities for not being activists, and it's interesting because he actually has called out Sidney Poitier as well. And he has always taken the harder route in terms of activism, in terms of what's going on with the people. There's a whole lot of people who kind of, after he was at some award show, and he basically said, enough with you and your award shows and your like red carpets and your, like, what are you doing when things have never been more dire? And he called out Beyonce and Jay-Z, and Jay-Z said something to the effect of, my presence is my activism, like the fact that I'm a billionaire rapper. And that wasn't received very well. And I think it, from my understanding, is that Beyonce and Jay-Z had done some giving in private, but they hadn't done the level of activism that Beyonce would later do. And so actually after Nelson Mandela's death, Jay-Z's, I might be quoting this slightly wrong, but I'm just trying to remember from 21 Essays, but I think Jay-Z's mother, actually somehow they were going to all be at the same thing, and she said, this is your time to reach out to Mr. Belafonte. And they had a private meeting, and then they had a series of meetings, and he actually met with both Beyonce and Jay-Z as a couple and individually, and I think that was about I don't know, when did Mr. Mandela die?
4 years ago.
Somebody, Google, 2004?
4 years ago.
4 years ago. So, so over the last few years, there's definitely been both a rapprochement in terms of their relationship, but I think also them directly taking guidance from him. And I think in some ways, some people feel like the Meek Mill case was one that they partnered on because Mr. Belafonte's nonprofit and Carmen Perez led on that, but Jay-Z was involved in that. And so, so I think that it was a long time in the making, but they definitely were able to fix some of that. But good memory in remembering that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so.
I have 2 questions. Sorry, but the first question.
Don't be sorry.
The first question, it took me a long time to come to Beyoncé. I was familiar with Destiny's Child and some of her music. I've definitely danced to some of her music, but like holding on to her as an icon is something that is very, very recent. So I was just curious, what was your sort of come to Beyoncé moment? So that's question 1. And then question 2, you made a comment about anthologies and how you hope people read all of it and not just the authors that they know. And I never thought about that. I always thought that people would when I get one, I read it, and it'll take me a while to read it because I'll read it and kind of soak it in. Is that something that happens? Do people get an anthology and just read a couple of the pieces and then move on? And what is your hope for? I mean, I guess your hope is that you want them to read it all, but I found that interesting. I don't know if that's a question more than a statement, but
I guess I'll answer the second question. What was interesting to me, so the Beehive very much lives on Twitter, which is not my social media of choice. And so it's been a struggle for me to keep up with things. And what's been interesting to me as people start to order the book is that I start to see tweets that say, even though it's a long book, there are a number of pieces that are shorter in it. And even if you're not a strong reader, you should feel comfortable picking up this book. Which for me was such a reminder that a 225-page book might be longer than some people might have read, and so I think that's really interesting. I mean, it's funny because I feel like my anthology moment really came around me being a mother and just being tired at the end of the night and being able to read one thing and being able to finish it was very satisfying to me. So for me, it came from exhaustion, not from not wanting to read things, but to be able to dip in and out of something and have some sense of completion was very satisfying. But it's been interesting to note how many people are I'm not really a reader, and so how am I going to engage with this book? And I think that was very important for me to realize.
So I have a question. Do you read from the first page when you get an anthology? Do you read from page 1 to the end?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you're just like a dream reader. So you're just not representative, I think. And in constructing an anthology, because I don't believe, all right, who dips around? No one? Thank you. All you other people. In constructing and ordering the anthology, I had questions about how are these supposed to relate to each other and speak to each other and move one from the next when there are independent pieces organized under the umbrella of this idea, but they're not really obligated. You didn't say, this author has to respond to another author. So it's a really fascinating job as the editor to figure out how to order things. And I would like to know how you did it. I copped out in the end and did reverse alphabetical. Because it just happened to work out that if I did reverse alphabetical, it was kind of yes, the people with Z names finally get a chance. And also the last one was a really strong essay. So it was a way to have an order that seemed kind of random but ordered, but also a really strong essay to begin the book. How did you decide your order?
That's something that Elizabeth and I talk about a lot. because we're constantly, Elizabeth's my editor, and so she always has her things that she thinks should go first. I mean, it's interesting because I've written, both of my anthologies have been about women. We try to pepper some male voices throughout. So if we have 3 men, we're like, maybe they go this way. And in this one, we actually did a color insert. And so we have 2 visual pieces. Actually, Meredith Broussard has a piece, the data journalism piece, and this other woman has one about Beyonce's social media. So we put the visual pieces in the middle, and then we kind of built out from there. But it definitely is, it's hard to try to think of them reading in order. But and I think we also go short to long, because some people write so much longer. So that's part of it.
Your Come
Oh,
Beyonce
Come to
album?
Beyonce
Yeah.
moment.
Mine was the Beyonce album, just because I love the fact that she just dropped it. No notice, nothing. And the fact that it was a visual. I'm a music video fiend, so I like that there was a visual element to it. And I like that it was kind of upbeat, and which I think is interesting about Lemonade, because that one told like a happy story, and this one was like, ooh, things are not great in that household. But yeah, that one pulled me in.
Thank you.
I don't have one. I wouldn't say I'm in the Beehive.
Yeah, I'm not either.
But I think my level of appreciation was sparked by the Formation video. I was like, what is going on? This is great on all sorts of levels. And then I was curious about that and had this long way to drive around the Georgia countryside, and I didn't want to listen to any more country music stations. Or like all the equivalents of Rush Limbaugh. Like if you listen to a certain, if you go through a certain set of dials, you would think that the South is mostly white people and white people of a certain kind. So I didn't want to listen to that, so I just bought the album, and then I just was like, I'm just going to hear this again and again, and really loud in my car.
I think for me it was probably, I mean, I think I always had things I liked, but I think the Beyonce album and the surprise of it, I think is real. I think to be surprised by an artist in this day and age is pretty extraordinary. And I think the surprise of the Beyonce album, the Lemonade album, and the Carters is pretty great. And the Carters, the Ape Shit Louvre video is just like, I
Work
just
of art.
still can't get over that video.
Totally.
Like I just literally
beautiful.
Can't get past it. And I just think the visual, it's interesting. I mean, the Louvre has said they've had record attendance because of that. Because so, to me, that makes me think of spaces, and the minute you put all of these people of color into a space like the Louvre, and they're dancing and they're singing and they're interacting with works of art, you say this is a space that you might feel comfortable in and might be worth exploring, which I think is a pretty extraordinary message that I think really generations of people will unpack. Like I grew up in New York, and I didn't have images of people like me in the finest museums. I mean, I remember being in college and going to the MoMA, and it just so happened, I didn't know, but Lorna Simpson's show was up, and she was the first Black woman to have a solo exhibit at the MoMA. And that was when I was in college.
Yeah.
Like the fact that the whole time I was a kid, that there literally wasn't that experience to walk into the museum and see a whole show that reflected women that looked like me. I mean, and I think there was probably some big gaps after that show as well. It's not like it just all changed.
Right.
So I think that's pretty powerful.